Good evening. Good evening. My name is Paloma Pineda, and I am a junior here at CMC.
And my name is Chanel Vergi, and I'm a freshman. Tonight we are here to introduce the very first annual Women of Color Power and Purpose Forum, hosted by, thank you. This event is hosted by the CARE Center, the Kravis Leadership Institute, and the Berger Institute.
You may be wondering why we're doing this and why now. Well, as much as we have progressed in reducing the discrimination faced by women of color in the past few decades, we still have much to do. Women of color still face discrimination in the workplace, classroom, and beyond. And women of color still face hardships every day that prevent us from finding our power and purpose. But we are here to change that.
I can personally remember the very first time I realized that as a woman of color, my life and experiences would always be a little bit different. From the age of 7, I participated in summer musical theater programs every year. The very first show we did was Hairspray. For those of you who are familiar with the musical, you will know that it's about the discrimination that African Americans faced in Baltimore in the 1960s. Because of the racial focus of the musical, the director made it clear that this summer program would never cast based on race. Even if that's what was done in Hollywood, this program was just supposed to be for fun. There was a girl in the program that was a year older than me. She was also Indian and one of the most talented people that I have met to this day. I always looked up to her every year that we did the program. However, with each passing summer, I noticed that even though she was by far the most talented one, she only got the lead role when we did Aladdin, a musical with a women of color lead. When we did Grease and every other musical, the lead was always played by the blonde-haired, blue-eyed Caucasian girl. It was then that I realized that even though the directors made a conscious effort to be completely impartial, they could not force themselves to be colorblind. I realized that I would always see the world through different eyes to my Caucasian friends. And that is why we are here today. We are here to learn how to navigate the world as women of color.
We would now like to introduce LaTanya Slack. LaTanya is the principal and founder of Slack Global Consulting, which specializes in facilitating, visioning, and assisting individuals and organizations with planning and navigating critical decisions. She is currently a senior lecturer in government and the founder of Behind the Veil, Women, Race, and Leadership in the Nonprofit Social Justice Sector at Claremont McKenna College. Tonight's event is part of the Beyond the Veil speaker series.
Thank you, and again, welcome to the opening dinner of the Women of Color Power and Purpose Forum. Please join us in welcoming LaTanya.
Thank you, Paloma and Chanel. I'd like to do a shout out to our students who are seated at this table right here. Patrick, Brittany, Paloma, Chanel, Ianu. They've been doing an amazing job putting this conference together, and I know you guys are going to enjoy it. So good evening. Welcome. As a co-sponsor, wait a minute, did I say good evening and I didn't hear anything? Good evening. Okay, all right, good. All right, just make sure you're awake now. As one of the co-sponsors of the Women of Color Power and Purpose Forum, I want to thank you for attending this evening's keynote with Judy Belk. More on her in a second. But as Paloma mentioned, I've been working with the Claremont McKenna College on a project called Behind the Veil, Women, Race, and Leadership in a Nonprofit Social Justice Sector, where we examine what it takes to be a woman of color leader by highlighting and uplifting their leadership journeys. You'll meet many of these leaders this evening, they're here with us, and tomorrow as they are facilitating the workshops. Tonight we have a real treat. You have the opportunity to meet a leader who exudes all the exceptional qualities and characteristics of a real, wait for it, superhero. This is the Power and Purpose Forum, right? Yeah. Okay, all right. Well, tonight's keynote represents the purpose and the power, specifically superpowers. So bear with me here. If you're not a fan of comics or you've been secluded and you have not seen all the fierce femininity and feminine fierceness that's been on the movie screens lately, the fabulous women in Black Panther and Wonder Woman, That's right, are just some of the examples. So I know what you're thinking. How is Judy a superhero? Well, let me tell you. Some of us who are a little bit older may remember a certain superhero's resume that boasted being faster than a speeding bullet, more powerful than a locomotive, what we would call train, and able to
Leap tall buildings in a single bound.
exactly, somebody's on it, right? Leap tall buildings in a single bound. So exactly, you know who that is, right? The guy in the leotard, red and blue. So, well, Judy doesn't wear the S on her chest, but as you can see from her bio, she's been flying high for many, many years and has amassed a lifetime of accomplishments in both corporate and nonprofit worlds. Currently, the California Wellness Foundation's first African-American president and CEO, she's previously held senior leadership positions with Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors and the Levi Strauss Foundation. In fact, her bio oozes with words that show she's done a little more than just leaping and bounding. Words like led, created, bounded, and designed. It would be difficult to read about her professional accomplishments and not be impressed. However, in the tradition of the Behind the Veil project, I wanted to learn a little more about what it is that makes her a superhero, leader. Even though I've known her for many years, I did a little investigating and, surprise, surprise, I was able to uncover her superpowers. No need for a sequel or any of that, a character arc, all that. I figured it out. So, for those of you who haven't seen Black Panther or Wonder Woman, I apologize. But Judy, I think, represents the Queen Mother, Princess Shuri, Nakia, General Okoye, and Diana Prince, all wrapped up in one real-life example right here in Southern California. So, I'd like to tell you exactly what makes her a leader and superhero. First, like General Okoye, she's got a glorified past laden with accomplishments and awards. Just like those serious action warriors, she works hard. One person even compared her to that long-lasting battery that keeps going and going and going. Remember that? If you ever had the pleasure to work with her or see her in action, you'll know she brings the chops, meaning she's going to work harder and longer than anyone else. She brings excellence and expertise to her many roles. I know that for me, whenever she enters a circle or group that I'm a part of, I and many others breathe a sigh of relief. Oh, good. Judy's here. Things will be righteous. Ethical, and I dare say moral leadership are qualities we don't celebrate enough. So I want to especially thank Judy for this particular superpower, her Nakia-like integrity and her Queen Mother wisdom. Second, she's fearless, bold, and brave, a necessary requirement for all superheroes. She's not afraid to say what needs to be said, no matter the environment. She speaks her mind, whether she's writing about race, social justice, or gun violence, or about her family, or Black women and our hair. Judy is a truth teller. I appreciate her ability to take those topics that people generally skirt or avoid and make them relatable and relevant. She's not afraid to speak up and speak out, even when it's not popular or popularly supported. Third, in addition to calling people out, she has the ability to call people in. Everyone I spoke to talked about her incredible ability to observe and listen. So midwives and doulas are called baby catchers, right? Judy is a story catcher. She makes you feel like you are seen, you matter, and your story matters. Undoubtedly, her keen investigative instincts stem from her background as a journalism and mass communications major at Northwestern University. Even her husband of 38 years, Dr. Raj, says she digs like a reporter in order to learn from others. She takes note of what she learns and uses it to better the world around her. However, Dr. Raj did note that, like Princess Shuri, he is the techie engineer person in the family. But that doesn't necessarily mean that Judy actually uses his expert advice. He seemed truly perplexed by that for some reason. So like all superheroes, Judy's origin story starts with her humble beginnings, grows with her amazing ability to learn and adapt over time, and sharpens as she hones her leadership arc to stay connected with her power and purpose, even when an occasional evil nemesis crosses her path. Please join me in welcoming Judy Belk to the Athenaeum.
I guess I just decided to just sit there and enjoy it. And the fact that you tracked down, my husband, Roger, that is really, so thank you. That was great. And as a writer, I really appreciate words and storytelling. So you did it. So thank you so much. It is really great to be here with all of you. I'm so amazed. College students on a Friday night, rainy night, and you're here. I'm impressed, and I'm really, really honored. So thank you so much. LaTanya is a dear friend and a colleague and a superwoman of her own. So when she, I think, reached out to me, I want to say like 6 months ago, there were two things that just kind of caught my eye. One, she wanted me to do it. She said, she was spending some time out here, and she said it was going to be focused on women of color and power and purpose. And I said, I am in, so I couldn't resist coming. The other thing I have to say is, we all, as women, wear different hats. And for me, I'm a mother of, two amazing, youngins. And sometimes it's hard, being a parent and providing advice. So I just couldn't resist the offer to come here and share some advice with all of you guys. I'm delighted to do that. Before I go on, I want to just introduce a colleague of mine that's pretty amazing, Stephanie Gomez. She works in our public affairs department at Cal Wellness, and she agreed to give up a Friday night. So if you are interested in thinking about opportunities in the philanthropic sector, and how someone who has a degree in public policy has ended up at Cal Wellness, she's a really good person for you to network with. The other thing, I'm going to try to hit on some things that are important to me and I hope of interest to you, but I'm also eager to hear what's on your mind. So I'm really interested in the Q&A. And so I might do a few teasers. I might say a little something and say, if you want more, if you want to hear more about it, ask me during the Q&A. So just kind of know that, because there's loads of stories that I can share with you. I don't know about you, but we're living in interesting, times. Lately, some mornings I feel like, staying in bed and putting the covers over my head and taking a deep breath from politics, presidential tweets, and everything else. And the last 2 weeks has been really tough, especially for those of us at California Wellness Foundation, but I really think for America in general. I'll be happy to tell you a little bit more, and I will later, but the California Wellness Foundation is only one of 3 foundations in the country that explicitly makes a statement and has a funding priority on gun violence prevention. We've been doing it, we're a relatively new foundation. We've been doing it for 25 years. I will share a little later about my own tragic experience in losing a family member to gun violence. So it's been a difficult week for us and for me personally, given what happened in Florida, and I understand there was another shooting in Michigan today. So I started my day participating in a call, bringing together the foundations, an organization we created, Hope and Heal, and talking about the amazing work that's being driven by young people. And so it was a positive way to start the day, in the feeling that, when you think you can't do anything, there's an opportunity to make an impact. So I'll be happy to talk a little bit more, about that. I know that all of you guys are at a point in your lives where you're really making and thinking about some big choices. I was trying to recall the many, many years ago when I was your age, and making the decisions about what is your place going to be in this world. How are you going to make your mark? How are you going to pay, if you were like me, educational loans, and how you can make a difference. And lots of possibilities, but also a little bit of anxiety. So I'm hoping maybe in sharing with you a few things that I've learned along the way and might be food for thought on how you might think about it. There are kind of three themes that keep popping up that I want to talk about tonight and share some stories. The first is courage. What does it mean to have courage? And how can we find the courage to stand up for what we believe in? I've also been thinking a lot about justice and what it takes to build a fair, more just society. But one of the things I keep thinking about is myself. Instead of looking to others, certainly can, in my mind, look to the White House and other leaders at this point, and I could just kind of stay in bed and put the covers over my head, or I can say, okay, what can I do? How can I stay true to myself? So courage, justice, and self will be themes that I'm going to talk about. Courage, defined as the ability to do something that frightens one. And this is a definition that really hits home for me, because at my core, I'm a really scaredy cat. Sometimes I put on a good front. I like to be liked. I don't like to disappoint folks. And sometimes it's tough to be courageous when you're kind of balancing that. To be perfectly honest, I'm usually shamed into being courageous by the acts of others who I have seen who have had a lot more to lose than me and continue to be courageous. So I want to share with you a story of courage that has stayed with me for years. Whenever I feel those cowardly demons creeping up, this is a story that gives me a quick kick in the butt and say, get it together. Early in my philanthropic career, I ran the Levi Strauss Foundation. It's a corporate foundation for Levi Strauss and Company. So I got to wear jeans to work every day. That was pretty cool. But even cooler was the fact that this company had a deep and historic commitment to social justice. And it really goes back to Levi Strauss himself, who left Bavaria because of anti-Semitism and decided to come to this country and started playing around with denim, and there was history. One of the programs that I rolled out when I was at Levi Strauss was to look at work and support women's economic development around the world. As I was leaving the foundation, I made the decision to leave the foundation after 10 years. This is one of those tidbits. If you want to know why I left, I can tell you. But I decided that as a treat to myself that I would make a tour of some of the global programs that we had supported during my 10 years. And I saved the best program for last. It's a program that provided loans to women in a rural village outside Manila so they could start small businesses. The director of the program invited me to lunch with the women entrepreneurs so they could share their stories of how the foundation support had benefited them. At the end of the lunch, one of the women in the group approached the director, and I could tell she was, pointing at me, looking at her. And I thought what she was going to ask was a question that I always got when I traveled through rural Asia was, how tall are you? But she surprised me. The translator said, she wants to know if you have any children. And I said, anybody's asking about my children, I'm all smile. So I said, yes, I have 2 children. And then through the director, the woman asked, how many? And I, said 2. And she giggled, and when I asked her how many she had, she said 5. And she didn't seem much older than 18 or 19. So I made a gesture to communicate, boy, you must be tired. Then the translator said she wants to know who is taking care of your children while you're here. And I told the director, my husband. And then the woman had a look of concern, and she started talking to the translator, and everybody was getting all nervous, and I'm thinking, what's going on? And so I kept asking the translator. I could tell she didn't want to tell me. And then finally, she said, she wants to know if your husband will beat you when you return home. I felt sick at my stomach. And, I was rushing to her, and I was really trying to engage, and I said, no, my husband doesn't beat me. And I was looking at the director, and I was getting a little hysterical. Tell her that husbands should not beat their wives. Please tell her that. And then the woman started talking faster and sharing a story, and the translator was trying to keep up. And the translator said, she said that she's walked 3 hours to get here. She said she won't make it back home in time to fix dinner for her husband. She says it's okay if he beats her, and I shouldn't worry. She said she's strong, and she had to come here today to thank you for the lending program. It's allowed her to feed her children with money from her embroidery business. Her children are in school. She said she's stronger because of it. I felt the tears well up in my eyes, and I still get teary-eyed every time I tell this story. And she was really worried. And then the Filipino woman reached into her apron pocket, and she handed me a gift. It was a pair of blue panties with the letters USA embroidered across the bottom in red. And so the director translated one last time. She said she wants you to have these. She wants to thank you for changing her life. And she's sorry the panties are so small, but she's never seen a woman as big as you. I'm still crying. It was a true story. And so coming out to see me that day was an act of courage for this woman. She knew there would be consequences, but she came anyway. And as I started my trip back home, I said, I gotta make one more grant dealing with domestic violence. Women across this country and across the world face violence just going to get water, just going to school, just trying to take care of their children. They are courageous, they keep going, and there is life and death to pay for that. And so the idea that sometimes I might say, well, God, should we make that grant or whatever, it gives me that kick in the butt. More recently, when I think about courage, I think about the dreamers, the young immigrants who were brought to this country as children. In particular, I think of Diana, a talented young woman supported by one of our grantees, was brought here from Mexico by her parents when she was 1 year old. She grew up in the United States surrounded by people who loved her sisters, her cousins, many of them US citizens. She never thought about being undocumented until she saw her peers getting driver's license, finding first jobs, and applying for federal financial aid to go to college. Diana was denied these opportunities. Then the DACA program was announced in 2012, stands for the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. And it allowed Diana to apply for relief so she could work legally, so she would not be deported. Diana and thousands of young people courageously stepped out of the shadows and registered with the government, giving personal data and information, believing that there was going to be a pathway to legal status. But President Trump canceled DACA, and Congress hasn't come up with anything in its place. And now 700,000 young people, The most of any of them are here in California, find themselves in limbo. Diana and thousands of other dreamers are at risk. So courage. When you think about stories like these, thinking about, should I go to law school or should I do this, and being scared or being afraid to stand up and just say, no, you cannot make that joke about whatever in my presence. When you think about those folks, it puts lives in perspective. If they can show courage, the courage to find work and dignity and walk, and know they're going to get beat when they get home, we can certainly stand up. Now I want to talk about justice. Justice. It's a concern for peace, fairness, and genuine respect for people. It's something we could use a lot more of these days. My thinking about justice has been informed by the injustices that I've witnessed and experienced personally. California has been my home for over 40 years, but I'm a Virginia girl. Yeah. Who else? Yay, really? I grew up in Alexandria, just outside of Washington, D.C., long before it was a hip tourist destination as it is today. I'm related to just about every black person that lives in Alexandria, who's been there a generation or not, and they all come and see me when I come to town. I grew up in the waning era of Jim Crow. I was born in a segregated hospital just 10 miles from the White House. When I started school, the 1954 Brown decision had been the law of the land for almost 6 years. That's a decision, as you know, that outlawed separate but equal schools. But Brown didn't change things overnight, and Virginia is a stubborn state when it comes to justice. It was 1960, and my older sister Vicki and I were still bused across town in a separate but unequal school, even though there was a sparkling brand new school that had just been built a couple of blocks from our house. I noticed as we were bused past the school, this in the eyes of a 6-year-old, that that school had a black top where they had actually permanently engraved hopscotch and 4 squares, where at our school, we had to chalk it in, and I thought that was a waste of time. So I asked my mom, I want to go to that school, Mama. Can I go to that school? And for a while, she just kind of ignored my questions. Then finally, she told me flat out, you can't go there. And I kept saying, why? And she says, because they don't let colored people in that school. And then that was my aha moment about race. I was so focused on the hopscotch and the 4 square that I didn't even know that everybody that was on the bus with me were black and everyone in that school were white. That was my aha moment on race. Every person of color has that aha moment. But it still didn't make sense, and I was a little persistent. So I kept saying, Mom, why don't they let colored children at that school? And she told me, they're stupid, that's why. And I still think that that's the best definition of racism, stupidity. But finally, the stupidity and the injustice got to my mother, and she made history by courageously raising her hand to join a legal case that was funded primarily by the Jewish community in Alexandria that forced the city of Alexandria to comply with the Brown decision. There were 8 defendants. My older sister Vicki was noted as the lead defendant. We won, but the city of Alexandria was tough. They couldn't use race anymore, so their rationale was, as it says in the court case, that we were mentally deficient. But we won in the end, and it paved the way for Vicki and me, along with 4 other black students, to join the white students at our neighborhood school. I started when I was in 1st grade the city of Alexandria did not fully integrate its schools until I was a senior in high school. You might have heard about that if you're a movie buff. If you've heard of the movie, why can't I remember? It's the one with Denzel Washington. Remember the Titans. The real, Coach Boone wasn't as cute as Denzel Washington, but I'm getting distracted. But just to show you how tough Virginia was, it was so just stupid. In other parts of Virginia, black kids were not lucky. Many school districts throughout the state simply shut down. Okay, if you say we got to integrate the public schools, we will just shut the public schools down. Now, they created a shadow district for whites, but there were parts of Virginia that generations of blacks did not have access to schools. So stupid. So now let's fast forward a couple of decades. I have two children, two amazing. I have a 26-year-old daughter, Casey, and I have a 30-year-old son, Ryan. I'll be happy to tell you what they do later on and how they've charted out. But we were living I was living in Oakland, working for Levi Strauss, and Ryan was about 12, and he kept saying that he was old enough to ride BART, so I let him do that a couple of times, but I was like, a real intense mom. I wasn't crazy about the day, and I would tell Ryan, giving him instructions, call when you get to BART station, call me when you get off, don't talk to strangers, don't lose your ticket. And then at one point, he just said that, Mom, I'm not afraid. In fact, I kind of think I make other people afraid. And I said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, I just noticed that when I get on BART, and he always wore a hoodie, that I think I make some white women, nervous. And so my heart sank. I'm saying I thought I would have just a few more years before I'd had to talk to him. But then he saw me getting all angst, and he said, Mom, you shouldn't worry about it. I figured it out. And I said, okay, how have you figured it out? He said, Mom, I just take out a book, and I start reading it. And it just seems like it calms everyone down. That was Ryan's aha moment. He knew at that age he was picking up cues about how his race was impacting, and it was painful as a mother. We have to find a way to talk about race. I mean, there are painful stories, and then there are humorous stories. Early in my career, I was doing some community needs assessment in Texas. I think it was Tyler, Texas. And I asked this really nice, young, feisty, white woman to call me a cab. And so I'm standing there, and she's giving the cab dispatcher information about me. It says, look for a woman in a green dress, and she looked over the shoes. She's got, black shoes on, earrings, and all that. And I'm saying, why don't you just tell them to look for a tall black woman? And she turned red. Oh, no, I wouldn't want to offend you. And I just said, if you had asked them to look for a tall, ugly black woman, I would have been offended, but I am a black woman. Which brings me to my third team, self, a person's essential being that distinguishes them from others. I mentioned my older sister, Vicki, earlier. I'm one of 6 children. My siblings and I were raised in twos, and Vicki was my twosie. We did everything together. My mom dressed us alike. We were born just 18 months. We lost Vicki to gun violence 38 years ago. The last time I saw Vicki was when she was my maid of honor. She was 28 years old. She's mother of an 8-year-old son. She's a talented, up-and-coming government manager. And she was a leader in our family church based in Alexandria. It's a church that was founded by my great-grandfather in the 1800s. Vicki went off to work one day, and she never came home. The day that I lost Vicki was a marker in my life. I think about my life in terms of before and after. So you can imagine how I feel every time situations like Florida happens. I immediately kind of go to the families. I can remember clearly everything about the day that I got that phone call. And, you know, as a result of that, you know, there's trauma. And my trauma is that everybody in my life who I care about know that if they're going somewhere, they have to tell me they got there safely. I have another thing to worry about now. My daughter, Casey, is a kindergarten teacher in Oakland. And so now I have another fear about her safety given what's happening in the classroom. It's funny, I was trying to think about a blog to write about, and I asked Casey what she thought about the idea of teachers carrying guns. And she says, you know, it's a dumb idea. And she said, her late grandmother would be proud because she said it's a stupid idea. She says, you know, Mom, in the communities that I work in, my students see school as a safe place to escape the violence that they see outside. She often has had throughout her career, you know, shutdowns because there's been gunfire out in the community. They have experienced trauma. These are kindergartners. So adding guns to the classroom would strip my students of that safety and comfort. And finally, because she also has her grandmother's sense of humor, she said, you know, my classroom is a nut-free zone so that I can keep my students with nut allergies safe. It's absurd to me that we might allow guns while trail mix is banned. And so I tell you this, it's not easy for me to talk about the loss of Vicki and the impact of race, but you know, whatever your story is, your losses, your passions, your hobbies, it's all part of what makes you who you are. And you bring that, you know, to your work and to your lens. You know, last year, you know, I got to stand up and help California Wellness develop a Hope and Heal Fund to really continue to raise our awareness about 35,000 Californians in the last decade have died of gun violence. And we need to really have the facts. The facts are that the majority of victims of gun violence are suicides. That actually, and suicides are impacted, there's two groups, young white men and older white men. The other category is accidental children. Then there is the community violence. So we need to kind of get the facts, and when you think about that, that's why we believe that it's a public health issue. I want to end a little with what I call Belk's common sense checklist. This is where I get to give you guys advice that, you know, it's always not welcome with my my darling children who hear a little too much. I was trying to think about what are 4 or 5 things that I wish someone had told me. Number one is look for alignment between your personal and professional lives. I've been incredibly lucky. You know, after experiencing a lot of injustice and hurt when I was younger, I wanted my life's work to be about service. I didn't know quite what that meant. I didn't know anything about philanthropy. And I've been able to work for a number of amazing value-based organizations. Growing up in Virginia, I mean, I knew government. My parents worked for government. That was it. I didn't know anything about the corporate sector, and not too much about the nonprofit sector in terms of a career. But I've now worked in all three sectors, and the common issue is that I was looking for alignment, values-based organizations, where I didn't have to be one way at home and one way at work. And I figured that out, made maybe one bad decision, but for the most part, you know, that alignment has happened. I wish that for you in whatever work you do, because it takes a lot of effort. I mean, there's even been studies that say you can get physically ill. There is not, by coincidence, that, you know, it's my husband who, you know, deals with, you know, a lot of poor folks and folks under stress who often don't have the choice to find alignment of the impacts of hypertension, of stress on your body. And a lot of that is not being in alignment. So I encourage you, and in order for you to find alignment, you guys have to figure out what you stand for. What is it that you stand for? What is it that, doesn't matter how much someone pays you, you're not going to do that. And you need to get that clear before you start moving. Sometimes you won't know that until you're faced with that issue. But you don't come to jobs, you don't come to the workplace as empty vessels. You carry something, and you need to think about what that is for you. The other issue is that, you know, I interview a lot of folks, and I find one thing is that there isn't a process where, you know, folks are interviewing me. You need to think about really being particular about who you work for. There's one thing that I didn't know a lot as I was starting, but I did know that I thought I was a pretty good catch for any employer, and for any man, by the way, too. That kind of helped me in love, is that, and I was willing, and I said to myself, I really did. I mean, I said I was willing to be single if I didn't find someone who was in it, and I was not willing to work for someone that I didn't think kind of viewed me. And so you need to look around. If you're interviewing in a big unit, you should ask to see the person who is the top dog in that. In an organization like ours, where we have 40 folks, you coming in, and if you offered a job, you should say, can I talk to the CEO? And a little secret is, if you're offered a job, that is your best time for negotiation. You know, we put a lot of effort and energy in the interview process, and by that time, you know, the dynamics have changed. You could be in the driver's seat. So think, basically, is it a place that's worthy of you? And I think it's a good question to ask, too, about life's partner. Is he or she worthy of me? Item number 2 is lean in on what you're good at. Great if you figure you want to be of service, you're committed to social justice, but if you can't write a paragraph, if you can't do something, you know, you're not going to be successful. You have to decide what you're successful at. And hone those skills. And I think the sad part is that if you're a person of color, it shouldn't be this way. You gotta probably even do it better. So whatever it is that you wanna do, you gotta be sure that you have the skills and the experience. I remember early in my career, I worked for the city of Sunnyvale, and it was kind of my first professional job. And I was administrative assistant in the mayor's office. And the mayor had just come back from, I think, a big mayor's conference. And I got the assignment that he wanted me to draft 10 letters, to some of the mayors that he's worked with. And so, part of it is I like to write. I think I'm a good writer. So I did all this research, finding about each of the 10 mayors, and I came in, and someone said, the mayor wants to talk to you about those letters. And I said, oh, I blew it. And he just said, did you write these letters? And I said, yeah. He said, well, they're customized. I mean, you put in a little something about everyone. And I kept saying, well, I couldn't write the same letter to everybody. And he said, you're going to write everything for me in the future. So it was just the skill that I had. I liked it, but that gave me affirmation, that I was a writer. And that, I would say writing has probably kind of given me that competitive edge. Number 3, and this is, I wish I had this advice, is get comfortable with money and power. Lean in, and nothing is wrong with money and power if it's in the right hands. But I remember interviews early in my career, I'm embarrassed to say, is someone said, well, what's your salary? And I just say, pay me whatever. I want this job. Don't do that. It was later that I found out that many men who were doing the same job were making more than I did. So you need to think about what you're worth. There is a new law, gender law in California, that it is illegal to ask anyone what their salary is as part of their job. And it was driven by women because women have been disadvantaged at that. For example, if I'm as an employer, have a $50,000 job, thinking $50,000, I ask you what you made, you say, I make 30. I'm thinking, oh, well, maybe I don't have to give her 50. And that hurts women because women traditionally have been paid less. So now the only thing employers can ask you is, what are your salary expectations? You can tell them what you're making, but be careful about kind of doing that in terms of negotiating. Again, as someone who hires folks, I put a lot of time and effort, and especially in this market, which is really competitive. I am not going to lose a good candidate over, $4,000 or $5,000. And it's important, even your very first job, because that impacts what you're making. And your base pay determines your 401k, and you get the picture. Now, power. Now, that's a tough one for me. I'm still dealing with that. As head of a foundation, one of the largest in California, I'm uncomfortable even sitting there listening to somebody say I have power. I'm like, whoa, feels weird, because I'm from the South, and you don't brag on yourself. And most women are assuming if we do a good job, we'll be recognized. That's not always the case. But I am in a powerful position, and it's just a little weird. I mean, since I got this job, people tell me all the time now, Judy, I always knew you were a brilliant person. Judy, looks like you lost a little weight. Judy, everything you say is so brilliant. Now you can start believing that, or you realize it's not all about me. It's about that I'm often standing between them, and $35 million. And you could do one of two things. You can kind of believe it and go on a power thing, or you could use that power to advance the common good. You can use the power like I did this morning in helping bring together folks to talk about what can we do in California around gun violence prevention and mobilize folks. I can get into rooms that others, such as many of our grantees and the people that we're serving, can't get in, and then use my voice and power to do it. So get comfortable with power, and if you think, am I fulfilling this for a broader purpose, it's okay. And, then you need to surround yourself with a support system. My family keeps me really, in check. My brother, often when, I tell him what I'm doing, he said, wait a minute, someone pays you to give money away? He said, that seems illegal. What are you doing out in California? But my real support system is my kitchen cabinet, primarily, mostly women. I have them strategically placed in different time zones, so someone is always awake. These are women who knew me before the fancy titles. These are the women who assured me I would not have the only child going to college who wasn't potty trained. They are women who just like me because they like me. They give me a swift kick in the butt and say, no, you didn't do that. They've also pushed me, like saying, you need to go for this job at Cal Wellness. And you need to, be bold in terms of making your point. So get a support system. And as I said before, be particular about who you work for and who you love. So I encourage you to go out there, be stubborn, be courageous, be bold, stand up for yourself, hold yourself to a very high standard. You have the power to make this a better, more compassionate, and more just world. I have so much hope for this generation, not only in looking at these two young people that I brought into the world and see the paths that they have, but by what we've seen on the streets, by just talking to many of you. I thank you for being here on a rainy Friday night. I'm really interested in looking at getting into conversation with you. I'll try to answer all of the questions that you have and anything that you want to follow up on. Thank you so much. Thank you.
At this time, we'll be taking some Q&A, so if you would like to ask a question, please raise your hand, and Luis and I will attend.
Thank you so much for your remarks. I gotta say, I love you already.
Thank you.
I'm sure lots of you in the room would agree with me. My name is Margarita Luna. I work for the California Endowment, and I'm really curious about what do you feel is most important about the work that you're doing at the California Wellness Foundation?
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, we love the California Endowment. For those of you who don't know, it is the largest health funder in California. And we particularly love you because in the last week, you guys have come out really bold in joining us in the fight around gun violence. You've joined us, as we have at Cal Wellness, in divesting your investments from gun manufacturers and really supporting students. So we want to thank you. And I get a lot of notes from, your boss, Bob Ross. So we really thank you. I think for us, it goes back, to values. We say, as you guys know, or you should know, private foundations are nonpartisan. But we're really clear about some values. And so when I tell you, what we stand for, it doesn't matter who's in office, you can understand why these are difficult times. Number one, we believe that every Californian, no matter what immigration status, has a human right to health care. We believe that. We believe that, violence prevention or violence is a public health issue. We believe in facts. I'm not, making it up in terms of the fact that where you live in California, determines your life expectancy. That's just a fact. We are not making it up. And we believe that even though philanthropy has a lot of resources, and we try to use those resources in a thoughtful way, we got to hold government accountable. All you have to do is look at what good public policy is, the Affordable Care Act, which I might say is still the law of the land, despite what you might hear. We have been working on health care access for 25 years. We could not do what that piece of public policy did in just a few years in terms of the impact on health care access. So it's really a difficult time now in terms of what we're working on. And I feel like, that little, carnival thing where you're kind of hitting things, this is popping up. And so we feel there's a lot at stake, and we live probably in the best state, in terms of all of those working. We have a thriving philanthropic community. We have a responsive state government, and we have, I think, some of the best and the strongest nonprofit leaders and innovators. And it's still, the stakes are really high because even in California, and California has used a lot of resources to deal with these issues, the federal government has to be a player. But thank you for that, for all your work. Yeah, we've got one right here, and then you're next, because I want to know about your DC connection.
Hi, my name is Callista, and I work. I have the kinky boots. Yes. So I work over at Claremont Graduate University, and I am early in my career. I work over in the development office, so I'm a major gift officer.
Great.
So what you said about power resonated with me. Great. Very much so. So I'm sitting across from $1 million donors, potential prospective donors, and. So So I'm wrestling with that right now. But anyway, I wanted to ask the question before anybody had a chance to get to it. Why did you end up leaving Levi Strauss?
Oh, that's a great
Foundation?
question. But before I can say that, I just want to commend you, because one of the areas in the nonprofit sector, which has been a hard nut to crack in my mind, because I sit across from a lot of development folks, is the lack of diversity in the development community. Yeah, and and I can count the number, and the reason why that is so important is because if you're a good development professional, you can influence the decisions of your donors. So it's a very powerful gatekeeper role, and because you become an advisor or whatever. So that's an area that has has been lacking in diversity. And the reason why is, the stereotypes about who can ask for money or who can interact with donors, not recognizing that there's an increasing amount of resources and dollars in the philanthropic community. I mean, I heard that the Smithsonian went crazy because they couldn't understand where the diverse staff of the African American Museum found so many $1 million donors. And I'm not talking about folks like Oprah and others. I'm really talking about folks who, number one, they were asked, and there was a compelling message. So I salute you on that. Okay, what was the question you wanted from me? Oh, this is a great question, and it's one that I think because there's choices. It was a great job. I mean, I had left Target and went there specifically because I wanted some global experience, and it was a global company, and my kids, were kind of, probably elementary. Yeah, Casey was, probably, first grade, and Ryan, was sixth grade. And I was under the impression that when kids got older, they would need me less. Not true. And they, when they started talking, and there were a couple of things that happened because I was traveling all over the world. It was very exciting. I had a team in Singapore, a team in Brussels, and all of that. And had great child care, had a great committed husband, and there were two wake-up calls. One, I at a parent-teacher meeting with Ryan, his teacher said, "So have you been traveling?" I said, "How do you know I've been traveling?" She says, "Well, we know when you're traveling by Ryan's behavior in class." And then, when went to a back-to-school night, Casey, and I had where you say, what do your parents do, and all of that, and she had Mom looks at a computer. And I thought I had it together because I was always home for dinner when I went in, but if you have global responsibility, guess what? Nobody's ever asleep. So I get up really early to deal with Europe, and I come home and have dinner, and then, dealing with Asia because they were just waking up. And I'm just kind of saying, what am I doing? And I just could not, even though was multitasking, I couldn't figure out how to be at a meeting in Singapore and on the soccer field in Oakland. And that's what it came to. And it was a big decision. I thought I was stepping back. And in the end, I don't think I would have got this job if I hadn't made the decision. So it was. And what I take from that and what I tell women and men, at different points in life, you gotta make decisions. And it's also I kept saying, my kids were important and I had all of the support, but it did feel that way. And I didn't know how much I missed until I kind of stepped off. But it was really scary for me from a financial standpoint and others. Okay, DC girl?
DC.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious because I do a lot of work with the youth that are like in high school, and I'm finding now these days they are way more interested in what's going on in social media than they are in focusing on how to feel inspired in their own life. And so what put you on your path? How did you not only feel inspired to believe that you could, but keep that inspiration going? And how do you inspire other youth to kind of believe in themselves beyond what they see on TV and kind of these,
Yeah, it's a good question. There are folks, one, I grew up in a very close-knit community in Alexandria. It was kind of amazing how little we had. I mean, I didn't have indoor plumbing until I was 12 years old. It had nothing to do with the capacity of the city of Alexandria to provide it, but they kind of just stopped, sewage lines, when it got to the Black community. So, church was I'm not terribly religious, but the church was a community center of sorts. It's where you got to see, at least in my growing up, Black people in charge. And the sense of possibilities in terms of community and public service. I mean, I'm old enough, that, I was volunteering, feeding folks who came, for the March on Washington and overlooking that. I've had folks who I don't even know supporting, like the Jewish community that came and funded the lawsuit. I wouldn't have gone to college without the generosity of some individual donors that gave money to Northwestern, and Northwestern had a needs-blind, program. I mean, I don't know who they were, but I benefited from that. And I benefited, from government, big time, in terms of getting me into the schools and others. So I think, to me, it's kind of fruitless to kind of fight social media, and I'm actually enjoying, parts of social media. And I have kids who, when, the kids ask me, well, Mom, how old were you when Grandma let you, use a microwave to do popcorn? And I have to say, we didn't have a microwave. Us going through and coming across, my husband's slide rule. What's that? So, we just, you have a generation, including you, that you don't even, and it's happened so fast in terms of technology. So I don't necessarily, I think there's so many, positives that I don't think it's there, but I do think this issue about the disconnectedness of, not, having a connection in terms of family and extended family plays a huge role that benefited me. I mean, it's, I'm one of those who grew up that, if I did something I shouldn't do, by the time I got home. Exactly, and, so I'm experiencing, my kids, didn't have the opportunity of that, but we tried to stay connected. When my mom was alive, we all got together at least once a year so we could stay connected. It's easier, and, there are things where, I ask my kids now what was important to them. Well, we always had dinner together. That was important. I set aside a room in the house which was called the reading room. You could talk, and you could read or be read to. And so there are little techniques that, the proudest thing that I think was the best idea because appreciation is really big, that I did with my kids, was that they would get all these gifts for Christmas that they really didn't need. And when they were really young, I would get them all up and said, you're not going to get it unless I get a thank you note written. And, many of and I remember Casey saying, I don't know how to write yet, Mom. I said, you know how to draw. And when my mom died, way, too early, when we were going through her things, she had kept every thank you note and every drawing. So thank you and appreciation. And I guess if anything, I'm a little amazed at how little that happens. I get asked for a lot of things, a lot, and I'm amazed at how many times you do something for someone and, they don't say thank you. Yeah. So I don't have any great ideas, but, I think it's a combination of that.
No, it's good to hear your
Yeah.
And it's someone from inside the belt.
Yeah. If you go to Alexandria and you just say, do you know any Belks? You'll meet some of my relatives.
I'm sure you know my mother, Marilyn Gaston, Dr. Marilyn Gaston, Dr. Gail Porter.
Yeah, I do. Those names are.
Time they do a lot of.
Oh, yeah. That's great.
I know, honey.
Yeah.
We're related.
I know, we are. We are. And if you guys, the one thing of technology, which, is great, is when my mom died, the Washington Post did a major article about her. about her fight in integrating the schools. And because of technology, that is there. And so every now and then when I'm missing my mama, I'll go look at that. So you can Google it. Her name is Maydell Casey Belk. And that you can still see it. Should I stop? One more? Yes.
First of all, I just wanted to thank you so much for coming. You've been such a phenomenal storyteller, orator, and guest, and it's really been a privilege to listen to all your stories and wisdom. So my main question, in the words of Angela Davis, we think a lot about changing the things we cannot accept. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about navigating the workplace as a Black woman and a Black woman of color.
Yeah. That's really a good one. It's been tough. I mean, I think the one thing I have is I've chosen well in love and works. I've chosen, but even in organizations, like some of it is funny and some of it is painful. Two, three that come to mind. One, when I joined, this first job in the city of Sunnyvale, I was. People were showing me around, and they kept saying, you need to meet Thurman, you need to meet Thurman. And I kept saying, why do they keep wanting me to meet Thurman? So I finally asked this woman, why do you want me to meet Thurman? She said, because he's the only other Black guy here, and they kind of think you guys will connect. Well, I met Thurman. I didn't like Thurman. Thurman had bad breath. I did not like Thurman. And so, it's like I don't know every Black person in the world, and I may not like them. So navigating that so I will never put myself in a situation of being the only one. I just will not. I won't go on a board that's not diverse and all of that. Second, I was at Levi's big supporter during the AIDS epidemic, and I made a presentation, a really important presentation to the leadership of the company, and I talked about the epidemic in Africa, which was happening. And one of the senior folks afterwards just said, I just wanted to give you a little advice, you being, new and all, and, Black, that, the first thing you talk about is around race in Africa. And I'm saying, yeah. And I know that wouldn't have been said if it was a white person. And, every time I travel international, going to business class, in the early days it's usually men, and they just said, the stewards would say in a very nice way, this is business class. And I said, yes, and I belong here. So those sorts of things that you kind of navigate and, kind of have to deal with, it's really tough. And the support system is helpful in choosing the right organizations. I have a big mouth, and the organizations that I've, been in have given me the space to be a part of that. Okay? Done.
Please join me in thanking Judy and LaTanya.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, please. Appreciate it. Thank you.